Have you ever wondered why, all of a sudden, the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses decided to soften its stance on higher education? For decades, attending college was portrayed as a spiritual waste of time, a distraction from kingdom priorities. But now the message has shifted. Is it simply a coincidence, or a calculated move for institutional survival? Behind this new understanding lies a darker reality, a web of government pressure, legal fear, and financial strategy. In Japan, the witness organization is facing scrutiny unlike ever before. The government has intensified its oversight of high-control religious movements after a shocking national tragedy exposed the damage such groups can inflict on their members and their children. It all began after the 2022 assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The killer's ties to the Unification Church, another authoritarian sect, sparked outrage and forced Japanese authorities to act. Now, Japan has enacted new laws targeting religious abuse, particularly protecting the so-called second generation, those raised under restrictive belief systems. And as investigations expand, Jehovah's Witnesses have found themselves in the crosshairs of a government determined to hold powerful religious institutions accountable. Have you ever wondered why the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses suddenly changed its tone about higher education? For decades, pursuing a university degree was labeled a spiritual snare, a place where faith decayed, ambition was selfish, and loyalty to the organization could die. Yet now, almost overnight, the message has shifted. The same leaders who once condemned higher learning are now calling it a personal decision. Coincidence? Or a desperate maneuver to protect a system on the verge of collapse? Behind this sudden burst of new light lies something far less divine, a calculated reaction to government pressure, legal fear, and financial survival. And the spark that ignited it all came from one unexpected place: Japan. In 2022, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated, a shocking event that tore through the nation's collective consciousness. But as the investigation unfolded, one revelation stunned the world. The assassin had deep ties to the Unification Church, another high-control religious sect infamous for manipulating its members emotionally and financially. Public outrage exploded. The Japanese government responded with an unprecedented crackdown on religious organizations accused of coercion, brainwashing, and exploitation. What began as an inquiry into a single cult evolved into a national mission, to expose any group that restricts individual freedom while hiding behind the banner of faith. And before long, another organization known for its rigid control and unquestioned authority found itself under the same unforgiving spotlight: the Jehovah's Witnesses. As the investigation into the Unification Church deepened, Japan faced a moral and political reckoning. Families across the nation began sharing stories of psychological manipulation, financial ruin, and emotional trauma caused by high-control religious groups. The public demanded action, and for the first time, the Japanese government could no longer look away. Legislators proposed a groundbreaking law that redefined what religious freedom truly means. Under the new framework, any religious practice that deprives children of education, medical care, or emotional stability could now be classified as abuse. It was a legal earthquake, a statement that faith could no longer serve as a shield for coercion. This new legislation was designed to protect what Japanese authorities called the second generation: sons and daughters born into religious systems that controlled their lives before they could ever choose for themselves. These young adults grew up fearing the outside world, pressured to sacrifice education, careers, and even health for their faith. Japan's new law gave them a voice, recognizing that indoctrination and control are not matters of belief, but violations of basic human rights. And in doing so, the country set a precedent that shook every organization operating under the banner of religious immunity. The consequences were immediate. The Unification Church lost its tax-exempt status and faced lawsuits exceeding $130 million. But the shockwave didn't stop there. Authorities began to widen their investigation to other groups with similar patterns of control and financial dependency, including the Jehovah's Witnesses. Suddenly, the organization that once prided itself on strict obedience found itself in the crosshairs of a government determined to protect its citizens. For the first time, the Watchtower's teachings weren't just being questioned morally, they were being scrutinized legally. When government investigators began demanding answers, the Watchtower organization knew it had to act fast. In a calculated move, it announced the launch of an independent study to examine the situation of Jehovah's Witnesses in Japan. On paper, it sounded transparent: A self-examination meant to show cooperation with the authorities. But when journalists looked closer, the illusion began to fall apart. The supposed independent researchers were not outsiders at all. They were active members of the religion, former Bethel workers still deeply loyal to the organization. It was the classic Watchtower tactic: control the narrative by pretending to open the books. The results of the study were carefully crafted to soften the image of the group. Charts and percentages suggested that witnesses in Japan lived happy, balanced lives, and that restrictions on education or personal choices were simply individual decisions. But even within the organization's own numbers, the cracks showed. Only 12% of Jehovah's Witnesses in Japan held a college or postgraduate degree, compared to 20% of the general population, and over 27% worked in low-paying service jobs, more than double the national average. The data, meant to protect the organization, instead exposed decades of systematic discouragement of education and economic independence. To anyone paying attention, it was clear what was happening. The Watchtower was attempting to rewrite reality. Under the pressure of new Japanese laws and potential legal consequences, the organization began rebranding its identity, shifting from a group that demanded obedience to one that claimed to respect personal choice. This sudden flexibility was not a moral evolution, it was a survival strategy. As the government tightened its scrutiny and public trust continued to erode, the governing body wasn't searching for truth, it was searching for cover. Behind every new doctrine and every softened rule, there is a single undeniable motive: money and legal protection. After Japan stripped the Unification Church of its tax-exempt status and ordered it to pay over $130 million in damages, the Watchtower's legal department in Warwick went on high alert. Losing tax privileges in one country could set a dangerous global precedent. Japan's actions sent a clear warning. Governments were no longer afraid to confront religious organizations that violated human rights or manipulated followers for financial gain. And for the governing body, whose vast network of assets and real estate depends on religious immunity, that was a nightmare scenario. This explains the sudden wave of personal choice reforms, a carefully timed series of doctrinal adjustments designed to create plausible deniability. By claiming that going to college, drinking alcohol, or wearing pants are now individual decisions, the organization can tell authorities, "We don't control our members' lives." It's not a spiritual awakening. It's legal self-defense. Behind closed doors, lawyers have likely replaced theologians, rewriting Watchtower publications not to seek divine truth, but to reduce legal exposure. The facade of religious freedom has become the organization's last shield against accountability. But the Japanese public, and especially the so-called second generation, are no longer buying the narrative. Former witnesses are sharing their stories with the media, exposing the psychological and emotional damage caused by a lifetime of fear and control. The image of a peaceful, apolitical religion is collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. What we are witnessing is not a reform, it's a rebrand under duress. The Watchtower isn't evolving, it's cornered. And as Japan tightens its grip, the rest of the world is watching closely to see just how far this once untouchable organization is willing to go to survive. Japan may be the first nation to openly confront the Watchtower's system of control, but it will not be the last. Governments across Europe and South America have already begun re-examining how far religious freedom should go when it begins to violate human autonomy. Activists and journalists are drawing parallels between Japan's investigation and other cases of spiritual abuse worldwide. What began as a domestic scandal in Tokyo has become an international precedent. A democratic government finally treating coercive religious influence as a matter of public safety, not private faith. And that shift changes everything. For decades, the governing body operated under the protection of invisibility, claiming to be no part of the world, while quietly using the world's legal systems to protect its wealth. But as Japan forces transparency, other countries are starting to look closer. Reports from ex-members in South Korea, Australia, and even parts of Europe echo the same patterns. Child indoctrination, restricted education, and financial dependency masked as devotion. The so-called spiritual paradise is showing cracks on every continent. The Japanese crackdown has given courage to victims elsewhere, who now see that even powerful organizations can be held accountable. If history has taught us anything, it's that authoritarian systems rarely reform. They adapt until they collapse. The Watchtower's current transformation is not a moral awakening. It's the instinct of survival. But the tide is turning. Once a government proves that faith can no longer be used as a legal shield for psychological control, others will follow. What's unfolding in Japan could mark the beginning of a global reckoning, a long-overdue confrontation between spiritual authority and human freedom. The events unfolding in Japan are not just a local controversy, they are a mirror held up to the entire world. What began with one man's tragic act of violence has exposed a much larger disease: the way organized religion can manipulate faith to gain power, wealth, and control. Japan's government, by daring to investigate what others ignored for decades, has ripped open a wound that many nations still pretend doesn't exist. The case of the Jehovah's Witnesses in Japan is not merely about one organization. It's about how far institutions will go to preserve their image, even if that means rewriting truth itself. Around the world, millions of people are waking up to a painful realization: freedom of religion should never mean freedom to abuse. The same tactics seen in Japan, isolation, fear of outsiders, guilt-driven obedience, exist in many countries, under different names and creeds. The difference is that Japan decided to call it what it is: psychological manipulation. And when a government begins to define that kind of control as a human rights violation, the balance of power shifts. Suddenly, what was once faith is being re-examined as systemic coercion, and that is a turning point for the entire planet. This moment is forcing us to confront a question that transcends theology: who owns your mind? If a religious leader can decide what you read, study, or believe, is that faith or captivity dressed as devotion? Japan's courage has exposed a pattern that many ex-members have known for years. Authoritarian religions thrive not because of truth, but because of fear. And when that fear begins to collapse, they scramble to reinvent themselves. That's exactly what we're seeing now: a global empire of control pretending to rediscover personal freedom, only because the law is finally catching up. But make no mistake, this is only the beginning. The Japanese investigation could become the blueprint for a new era of accountability. Other governments will take notice. Victims will find their voice. And the walls that once protected religious empires will start to tremble. The governing body can try to clean its image, but no amount of new light can erase the shadow of decades of suppression. What's at stake here is not doctrine, it's dignity. It's the right of every person to think, learn, and believe without fear of punishment or exile. If you've made it this far, it means you care about truth, not the one written in books, but the one revealed by courage. So take a moment. Leave a comment, tell me what you think about Japan's stand, and whether you believe other countries should follow the same path. And if this investigation helped you see the bigger picture, leave a like, because that's how this message reaches more people who need to hear it. The mask of freedom is finally slipping, and what the world chooses to do next will define an entire generation.